All right. So I am Anna Brown from Katie Budget Books. I am the marketing manager here. If you've been in store, you've probably seen me. I've been around for a little over a decade. But if you are not local, welcome. I am not at all a parenting expert, but I am a mom of three boys, a 17-year-old, a 3-year-old, and an 18-month-old. So those are my parenting credentials. That's all I've got. They're alive. So I feel like I'm doing okay. And I am so excited about this panel tonight because I don't know about you guys, but this year has felt a lot more stressful already than a normal parenting year, and parenting is always stressful. Um, but now we're also getting ready to go into the holidays in the year of COVID. And like, I still have no idea what that looks like for me. And I know Thanksgiving's like 2 weeks away, but like, it's hard to plan for the future. So it seems like a really good time to be talking about how to dial back our parenting stress. So I'm really excited to have our panelists here with us today. We have Olivia Scobie, who's the author of Impossible Parenting, which you're not going to see behind me because it doesn't come out until the 24th. So we're so excited to have her here pre-publication. And Rachel Bertsche, the author of The Kids Are in Bed. Nope, wrong side. My camera's reversed, you guys. I'm not unable to tell which side I'm on. And Lindsay Powers is the author of You Can't Fuck Up Your Kids. So there is going to be some language probably, just so you're all prepared for that. I hope that when you saw the titles of the books, you were aware. Sorry if anyone is offended by it, but that's how we're rolling tonight. So those of you that have not used Zoom webinar before, we can't see or hear you, and that is so that you guys will see the panelists at all times. But there is a Q&A box. So if you have any questions at any time, you can type them in there, and all of the panelists are going to take a turn kind of talking about their books. And then we'll be doing a conversation where we'll be answering those questions, but you can type them in whenever they occur to you, and we will address them during that conversation at the end. If you can't find the Q&A box because it's not normal for the meetings, you can type something in the chat. I will also be monitoring that. So we will be keeping track of all of that. But we are so glad you guys are here with us this evening. And I am so grateful the panelists are here so that we can talk about parent stress and what we can do about that. So we are going to start with Olivia Scobie, and I'm going to switch the view so you'll be able to see her as she speaks. Olivia Scobie is a social work counselor and educator who specializes in perinatal mood, birth trauma, and parental mental health. After a chaotic transition into motherhood, she spent years in academia studying gender, families, and parenting. Due to a deep desire to work with families one-on-one, she got out of the classroom and began helping parents struggling with perinatal mood disorders feel okay again and assisting overwhelmed and exhausted families deepen resiliency to get through life's challenging moments. She's so committed to supporting parents that she also founded the not-for-profit Postpartum Support Toronto. When she's not working with families or writing books, she can be found doing various distance sporting events throughout Ontario. She lives in Toronto. So thank you so much for joining us this evening, Olivia. And do you want to tell us a little bit about Impossible Parenting, and then we'll kind of chat for a bit?
Yeah, that sounds great. And I thank you for having me here, this like lone Canadian. I love Texas. I actually was in Texas in March as a way to celebrate finishing writing the book. And we had to leave early because everything locked down because of COVID. But I am really excited to go back to Austin when it's safe to do so. So thank you so much. And I want to talk specifically about 6 key markers of impossible parenting. And one of the things that I talk about in the book is just what happens in terms of the influences on our perinatal and our parental mental health. And I talk about a model that looks at how biology impacts things, how our thinking and our thought patterns impact things, how our life circumstances impact what happens with our mood, how our identity, our parental identity of like how we feel good about ourselves, who gets to look good in community. And all of the things within that model are happening within what I call the culture of impossible parenting. And I want to talk about each of the 6 kind of markers, just briefly touch on them, and then give you a little like resistance or resiliency strategy so that you can push back against them. And everything that I talk about will probably sound really familiar because one of the things that's really interesting about the culture of impossible parenting is that we can see it. We can see it in front of us. We often laugh at it, which is why movies like Bad Moms or shows like The Letdown are so popular right now. But the research around it says from a few years ago, Canadian research, that even though we can see it, we're actually working harder than ever to try and meet these core markers. And I think of it often as how a lot of us feel about like diet culture and body image, that we can look at the ridiculous standards and be like, there's no way my body will look like that. But then when we're alone trying on bathing suits, we'll be like, oh my God, I hate my body. I hate my thighs. And so there's often just a dissonance for us around that. So the first marker of impossible parenting is this idea that the more we sacrifice, the more we love, the more we get to demonstrate our love for our kids. And it sets up this really twisted way in which our suffering becomes praised and then rewarded, so that we are really encouraged to participate in this race to the bottom of who has it worse. And one of the things that comes up in this, a core fear, particularly for mothers, people who identify as moms, is that we don't want to be selfish, because that's seen as like one of the worst things you can be as a woman. And so as a resistance strategy, I'll often talk with folks about how we want to reorient how we think about selfishness, because there's really two sides to that. There's the first side, which is I think what we're afraid of, which is that we like don't see the needs of others around us because we're so busy trying to meet our own needs, versus what I call intentional selfishness, which suggests that like you get to look around the room and see that other people have needs and wants and desires. It's just that sometimes it's your turn, just like sometimes it's their turn. And you want to bring that all into balance in what I call shifting from child-centered parenting to like family-centered parenting, where everybody gets to negotiate to have those complex needs met in some way. The second key marker of impossible parenting is this idea that if we invest up front, then we will be really rewarded later. And we see a lot of what I call expert-based parenting here. Like, what does the book say that I should be doing now in order to like have this like really happy, healthy, and successful child later? And we see this a lot around birth, around like what a good birth is and what a bad birth is, around how we feed our kids, how we get them to sleep, how we bond or form attachments with them. And when I first became a parent 16 years ago, in Ontario, where I live, there was this campaign called The Years Before 5 Last the Rest of Their Lives, which was the most terrifying message I could have possibly received. And so I felt really doomed right from the start when they were like, you need to look into your baby's eyes while you're feeding them or they're going to be a psychopath when they grow up. I was like, I'm definitely not doing that. And so I don't know what that means for us. And one of the ways that we can resist that is what I call getting clear around what timeline you're parenting in at any given moment. Because really one of the biggest challenges is that we're being asked to parent in multiple timelines. There's a timeline of what's happening in front of us, like I need to feed this child, hold this child, soothe this child. There's a timeline of the near future, which is the times when you're at the park and you're like, okay, if we leave in the next 20 minutes, I can get them a snack and then they can get down for their nap. If they don't get down for their nap and they're not going to sleep tonight, then tomorrow's going to be really rough and I'm going to be looking at an appointment. And then there's the parenting for the distant future, which is how do I manage this conversation or this moment with my child, because I think it'll impact them later. They got in trouble at school. How do I talk to them about like why you're not allowed to bully people? How do I talk to them about why like consent is really important? And bringing clarity to be like, which timeline do I need to be in right now is really helpful to help manage that, because you can only be in one timeline at any given time. And also remembering that usually you get more than one shot. So if you do mess up that conversation around like why you're not allowed to bully people, you get more than one opportunity to come back to that later. The third marker of impossible parenting is the idea that danger is all around us at any time. And so I have to stay vigilant. And I really like to blame what's happened with like a constant news media cycle and with social media, because for the first time in human history, we have access to the most horrific and unusual stories of things that can go wrong in our lives. And one of the ways that that will often manifest for folks is what's called intrusive thoughts or scary thoughts. And these are really scary flashes or images of terrible things happening to you or your child or your loved ones. And one of the ways that we can work with intrusive thoughts is to do what I call amygdala training. And the amygdala is the part of our brain that's our internal guard dog. It's our internal threat assessor. And it's not that sophisticated. It learns through experience and it learns through hearing stories of things that could be threatening or scary. And so what happens when we become a parent is that stuff that feels pretty safe for us that like is risky though, like walking down the stairs is kind of risky. but that we've learned to do really well, because when we were learning how to walk down the stairs originally, we were careful. We scooted on our bums or held a parent's hand. And over time, it became deemed pretty safe and normal. So the amygdala doesn't go off. The amygdala needs to relearn what's safe and what's not safe, because we're not just responsible for our own safety, but also our children's. So we can talk to it. So if you get to the top of the stairs and you're like, have a vision of falling down the stairs with your baby, that you can be like, right, of course, the amygdala doesn't know that this is safe yet. And I talk to mine like it's a bratty teenager, or like talking to its parent, like, oh my God, I know how to walk down the stairs. But you could be way more self-compassionate of like, oh, you're scared. That's okay. I'll hold the baby tight, I'll hold onto the rail, and we'll do this safely, so that over time it can be repatterned and tucked away as something that's like generally seen as pretty safe for your body. The fourth marker of impossible parenting is the idea that we got to keep it natural as possible. It really picks up on this like back to the land movement that we've seen over the last couple of years. Shows up a lot around food. So it's no longer enough that you have to feed your kids vegetables. You now need to like feed them organic vegetables, meals made at home, grow the vegetables yourself in your own organic garden. And what's going on with this is really the rise of healthism, the idea that our goodness and like this core virtue that we should all be striving for is being as healthy as possible. And so one of the ways that you can resist that and to push back on that is to start to cut that link between your worthiness being tied to your wholesomeness. And this is something that comes up a lot in eating disorder treatment, because the first thing you want to do is help people not identify foods as good foods or bad foods, that foods are neutral and that we use them for a lot of different reasons. And nutrition in the body is only one of those reasons. The fifth marker of impossible parenting, the one that really irks me the most, is the idea of prescribed self-care. And so this is the way in which self-care has become really feminized and really resource heavy in terms of what it means to take care of ourselves. You need to learn how to run in a marathon. You need to take more bubble baths. You need to like do more girls' weekends away. And it's not that there's anything wrong with any of those things. It's totally fine to do those things. But when there's a should attached to it, that's where it becomes problematic. And then self-care becomes just one more thing on our to-do list that we're like, oh, I should journal, I should meditate. But there's nothing that joyful about that at that point. And so I'll really work with parents around just shifting that self-care narrative to something that feels way more supportive, which is what self-care was intended to be. And knowing that there's a difference between like coping self-care, which is totally fine to like eat ice cream out of the container if that's what you need to soothe in that moment, versus the other stuff is in a bucket that I call like the more you do, the better you feel. Like it feels good to move your body, but you don't have to do that every moment of the day or every second. Just because you're feeling distressed, you have a broad range of things that you can choose from to soothe yourself. And then the last marker of impossible parenting is the idea that we need to make every moment magical and then document that and then show it to all of our friends so that we can get likes in real time. And this is really where social media has created a really interesting tension for folks, that it feels good to share our best parenting moments with our friends, but it also can feel really bad to be looking at everybody else's best parenting moments. And so often we'll see things like, it feels like a lot of families have a brand these days online. There's like a real cultivated image, documenting things like, oh, we're going to do cake smash for the baby, or like, look at all these cool crafts now that we're doing, like homeschooling during the pandemic. It's so fun how creative we all are. But again, there's something wrong with that. It just has to do with the idea that you're watching like the best moments generally of people's lives, and it's not ever the whole picture, and getting really clear around like what feels good for you and what doesn't. And so the resistance strategy that often I'll suggest is to get clear around like, is this mine? Is this something that is important to me or not? And this really showed up for me around outdoor play. I actually hate going outside. It's cold often in Toronto. I really hate putting sunscreen on children, but I felt a lot of pressure to be like, oh, they need to run outside every day. And as soon as I was able to shift to being like, oh, we're an indoor family, we like movies and we like board games, it was so freeing and liberating. And it felt really okay to have people talk about their outdoor family adventures, because I'm like, yeah, cool, if that's what works for you. That's just not what works for me. So I'm going to encourage you to kind of play with these 6 themes. Like, obviously, we're just scratching the surface. You can learn a lot more about them in the book. I actually have a copy, so you can see what it looks like. But to start and really see them and name them so that you can start and choose what you want to do with them. You can choose to resist them. You can choose to go along with them, but like know that you're going along with them because that's the safest thing for you to do in that moment. And I think that the more that we all generally agree to just say like, I don't think I want to do that anymore, it opens up the opportunity for us to shift to something new, a new culture that I hope is rooted in things like kindness and community care, and a lot of self-compassion. So thank you so much for letting me talk about this.
Thank you, Olivia. I loved your book, and I love how it talks about transitioning from kind of child-centered to family-centered, that impossible parenting kind of centers around this idea that like it's all about the kids all the time. And that's actually a theme that was in all of these books. I love finding the things in common because it makes me feel like this is definitely the right thing to do, right? But that I kind of felt bad about myself as a mom because I am a more family-centric kind of mother naturally. And I had that big gap between my first son and my now little ones, to sort of figure out my identity as a mom before I started with the crazy littles again. Um, but I love that it's not that we're putting the children last, it's just that the family is a whole unit, right? And so everyone has to be okay for everyone to be okay. If I'm a screaming mess, putting the children first isn't helpful really. So I love that idea. And I had a
Totally.
question that now I've forgotten how to word the question. But what does that look like, I guess? Like how can you give an example of a shift from child-centered to family-centered, just so our attendees maybe sort of have an idea what that looks like?
I think it can look really different in every family. The marker often that I'll sort of be looking for is like, if this doesn't work for one person, it doesn't work for any of you. And so if you feel a lot of resentment around, I'll just use like sleep as an example. If somebody's like, oh, I could never do sleep training or sleep coaching strategies with my kid because I couldn't tolerate their distress. But I'm dying like every day. As soon as like my kid wakes up, I'm like, oh my God, like go to sleep. Like it's not working for you. And then you just get to explore a bunch of different options. You're like, okay, so do we want to sleep train? Do we not want to sleep train, but we want to like get somebody to help us overnight? Maybe we need to share the load in terms of like who's getting up with the kid differently than we are right now, because usually it's one person who's often doing that. And so it just depends on what makes sense for you and your family. And I really support folks coming up with their own like core parenting values or core parenting messages so that you filter everything through that. Like, does this align with like what we've agreed as a family is going to work for us? So if we agree that kindness is a really important parenting value, like what's the kindest thing we can do for all of us right now versus how do I get the kid to not cry, which is often a really futile task anyways.
All right, well, thank you so much, Olivia. Now we're going to introduce Rachel Bertsche. She's the best-selling author of The Kids Are in Bed, Finding Time for Yourself in the Chaos of Parenting, and also, I actually don't know, MWF Seeking BFF. I'm not really sure whether I'm supposed to say that title as the abbreviations or what they stand for.
Right. You got it. MWF Seeking BFF. It stands for married white female, kind of, plan the old singles ads, but the subtitles, my year-long search for a new best friend.
And also Jennifer, Gwyneth, and Me, The Pursuit of Happiness One Celebrity at a Time. She is also a journalist and editor whose work has appeared in the New York Times, Parents, Marie Claire, Teen Vogue, 17, Self, Cosmopolitan, Women's Health, New York, and more. She's a former producer for Oprah.com and an editor at Oh, the Oprah magazine, and she lives in Chicago with her family. So welcome, Rachel. We're so grateful you're here.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. And I should say, I'm so excited to read Olivia's book. So much that you just said resonated with me. And, I do think there's like some overlap with my book, and also I know with Lindsay's book as well, but a lot of things. And I was like, yes, I hadn't thought of it that way. So I'm so excited, and congrats for your upcoming release. And Anna, I was laughing when you said I'm not a parenting expert, because I also don't think I'm a parenting expert. I always say, like, my book is very much not a how to parent book, but sort of like how to harness the time when you're not parenting, and how to kind of welcome and accept that it's okay to take time. You don't have to be parenting, and Olivia touched on this, but you don't have to be parenting 100% of your time. And that so I'm excited to be a part of this panel, especially about the concept of stress and alleviating that. So my book is The Kids Are in Bed, as you see over there and right here. I have my frozen bookmark because my daughter put it in there, I guess. And so this book is really about how to navigate the time you have to yourself when you're not working or parenting. And oftentimes I'll tell people that, and I'll hear kind of chuckles, because I think the idea is like, oh, that time doesn't exist. What time to myself? And that time is certainly hard to come by, but I do think there's more than we realize if we kind of harness it. And by that I mean, like, taking small chunks when you have them, not necessarily waiting for 2 hours to pop up where no one's going to need you, because that, as we all know, especially when we're all stuck perhaps in the house together all day long, as my family is, 2 hours of quiet is not a thing. Also tuning out the mental load. So, I always like to use the example that even a massage, if you're spending the entire 50 minutes thinking about all the things on your to-do list, like, stops being a relaxing and a pampering event. So if that is what you like for self-care, and then you go and you spend the whole time kind of thinking about all the things on your to-do list that you should be doing instead, you sort of lost that relaxing moment. And then, figuring out ahead of time, again, this sort of touches on something Olivia mentioned, but figuring out ahead of time what you actually like doing versus what you should be doing. So I think sometimes, we finally have a few free minutes, and then it's all the things that we think we're supposed to want to do at that time, or we're supposed to do at that time to feel productive, when really maybe what you want to do, and often what I want to do, is just like watch a TV show. That's okay. So for my book, I actually did a survey I worked with a research firm to do a survey of 500 parents across the US, 500 moms and dads, to sort of see how they use their time and how they felt about that time, which I thought was really interesting. And I did learn some really interesting things. One of which was that nearly 80% of parents said that their time, what we called open time, because I don't love the term free for all the reasons that we're mentioning, which is like, it doesn't feel free, but because that open time didn't feel free because they were busy thinking about all the things that they could and should be doing instead. And I also heard from parents that they felt like one of the biggest obstacles to enjoying any time to themselves was that their chunks of time were too short, like time fragmentation. People were waiting for these longer, stretches of time that just don't really, sometimes they come up, but not necessarily every day. So I proposed in my book something I call pockets of indulgence. And that concept is sort of just the idea of, like, really carving out whatever chunk of time that you have, or you can find that works for you, but thinking of it less of like an endless stretch of time, and thinking of it really in terms of like a pocket. And maybe that pocket is 10 minutes because you have, you dropped someone off at a play date and you have to go pick someone else up, and now you have these free 10 minutes, or longer, 20 minutes, an hour, whatever it is. But I think one of the things that keeps parents, or what I've heard from parents, and I know I've experienced this myself, is that thinking of like, oh, I'm watching this TV show, but I should be doing all these other things. Like, the dishes are waiting for me, and all these things are waiting for me, and it's sort of looming. And so for me, actually having sort of an endpoint to that moment of like, I'm just going to do this for 10 minutes, or I'm going to do, I'll say to myself after my kids are in bed sometimes, like, okay, I have 2.5 hours before I'm going to probably go to sleep. So I'm going to watch the show for an hour, and then I'll go do the dishes, and then I'll do the other things. And knowing that I'll get to those things eventually is kind of frees me up to actually like sink into this moment and enjoy it. And sometimes you are enjoying yourself so much that you go over your, pocket, and then that's like so wonderful. That's great. But I think, letting yourself say, okay, like, I will get back to the dishes or whatever it is. I always say, like, the dishes will be fine. You know, if you like love the show and you keep binging, or you start reading a book, or you just can't stop, or whatever it is that you like doing, you know, you can do the dishes the next day. But I think kind of for people that kind of idea of the pocket, I think can be really helpful, to sort of free yourself up. And I also call it a pocket of indulgence, because I think it's really important, again, to use that time for whatever it is that you like to do. You know, it's not what you should be doing, or what other people like doing, so you probably think that you should like doing, but whatever, something that feels just indulgent. And I think, you know, that's different for everyone, but thinking about, you know, knowing what that is. So for me, you know, one thing is actually that question. One of the biggest obstacles I'll hear from parents is that they come downstairs after putting the kids to bed. They have 20 minutes, but they're so tired and their brains hurt, and they can't even like figure out what to do with that time. And so then they pick up their phone and they scroll social media, and then suddenly it's bedtime and they're tired, and they're kind of feel like they've wasted. And there's a lot of feelings of regret of how you kind of use that time, which is not, you know, I don't mean to knock on social media, because I use it too, but if you're doing it because you choose it and you like it, that's great. If you're doing it because you just don't want to have to think about what else there is to do, and so it's easy, and then you're going to feel bad about it later, then that's, you know, if you like keeping up with people, great. But I think the moment where you start to feel like, oh, I wish I had done a million other things, but I did this, is hard. So one thing I really suggest, and has helped me a lot, is really kind of sitting down just for like a few minutes and thinking about like, what is it that I actually like to do? And making a list of 5 things. And I just like put that list in my phone. And for me, that list, you know, was like doing a crossword or a jigsaw puzzle or a crossword, reading a book, exercising, watching a TV show, and calling a friend. And it was funny at the beginning. I was laughing at Olivia when you said about being outside, because I feel the same way. And originally I put, you know, go for a walk on my list, and slowly kind of had to like accept that, like, I don't really like going for a walk. Like now I do, I guess, because there's nothing else to do, but you know, I don't find it especially like revitalizing, but it just felt like something that I should want to do. But I think when I go for a walk, I'm spending most of the time being like, when am I going to get back home? And so then I was like, you know what, I like doing like crosswords, and like I like doing puzzly things, and maybe, you know, that's great. So and literally sometimes I will be like, I only have 20 minutes. What should I do? And I pick up my phone and look at that list, and it just helps me. Like, it takes a lot of the work out at the end of the day when you're just like mentally drained, and even deciding what to do feels like too much work. So that's something I definitely recommend. Just kind of like, what is it that you like to do? And not what you think you're supposed to like to do, but what you actually like to do. I found some other interesting things when I was researching for this book, and a couple of those things that really struck me, that I think speaks to this conversation today, is the one research that full-time working mothers today actually spend more time with their kids than moms did in 1965. And I think we have this idea that like that was the golden age of parenting, and we're all falling short because we're doing so much and we're not giving our kids enough time. And so we need to like spend every second with them that we can. So to me, that realization was like, oh my God, we're doing so much. And, you know, mothers back then weren't doing more. It's sort of a myth, this like golden age of parenting. And once you kind of accept that, maybe you can alleviate some of the guilt, because we are doing enough. And the other piece of research I really loved was that there are studies that show that what kids want is not more time with their parents. They want less stressed parents. And so that was like, you know, because I felt like, oh, okay. Every second of it's okay if I say to my kids, you know what, like I'm going to go to book club. I'm going to go see a friend. And one, obviously, I think setting those examples for kids is so great, to say like your time for yourself and your leisure time is important too. And I'm a person outside of being your mother is great. But also like, they'll be okay, because I'll be better and more of myself when I'm with them. And so part of everybody wins. So I think part of the like alleviating the stress of the holidays is, if we, for whatever reason, feel guilty if we're being selfish, you know, I say like, do it for yourself. But if it resonates with you more, also know you're doing it for your kids. Everyone is better off if you're taking some time for yourself. So then the rest of the book sort of looks at the areas of our life that take the biggest hit when we have kids. So that is sort of our romantic relationships, friendships, and, quote unquote, self-care, which in this case is time alone or sleep or really whatever it is that you enjoy doing. And maybe that's exercise, maybe it's not, but just the time where you can focus on yourself. Sort of looks at strategies and ways to take back that time. So that's sort of my spiel.
Okay, first of all, I felt really seen by your book.
Thank you.
I am definitely guilty of the, like, this is what I should be doing with this time. Like, the kids go to sleep, and if I didn't get the dinner dishes done before they went to bed, like, I should be doing that. And I will tell myself I'm taking time for me. But the whole time my brain is going, you should be doing the dishes, you should be doing the dishes, you should be. And the only way I found to address that is like binge watching shows, right? Like then my brain just shuts off and I don't have to listen anymore, but I don't feel good about it. And it's not that I'm not enjoying the show, it's that I'm only watching the show instead of doing things I'd rather be doing because it drowns out the brain.
Yeah.
So I really loved what you'd said about the time limit. If you only give yourself an hour that's indulgence time, then the dishes will still be there an hour. You're going to get back to them. And I've been doing that the last few days, and it is really helpful that, okay, so I'm getting this amount of time for me, and then I'll do that thing. And then my brain does just shut up about it because I know I'm getting back there.
I'm so glad to hear that. That makes me happy.
But I know one of the things I wanted to make sure to ask you is, you have in the section about romantic relationships, you list some reasons why it's important to prioritize your relationship for some of your pockets of indulgence. And I know that's been a struggle for me as a parent, that like I do the kid stuff and I do the me stuff okay. And I even actually do pretty well. Your book seemed to indicate that most parents put friends last, and I am definitely guilty of putting my friendships over my romantic relationship because I spend so much time with him anyway, right? So when it's the alone time without the kids, I go out with friends more. But I was really interested in what you said about the reasons it's important to prioritize our relationships. Yeah. So can you speak to that for a minute?
Absolutely. I mean, I think one of the main things is that when we have kids, we suddenly become kind of partners in raising children, and it's very easy to start forgetting all the other reasons why you originally maybe fell in love or connected, or that there's more to that relationship than just raising kids. I always joke that my husband and I, the very first time we finally went out to dinner after our daughter was born, we were like so excited. It was our anniversary. We sat down, and the first thing we did was take out our phones and like look at pictures of our daughter. And I was like, no, you need to, it's so important, for your relationship to stay connected in terms of other, and just remember that you are more than co-parents, and that you are more than, mom and dad. So I think, above everything else, there's that. And, just remembering and finding time to do whatever. There's the relationship section, there's like there's one of the chapters is about sex, and obviously that's an important part of a relationship. But I think, above all, it's like, and there's all this pressure for like date night, that that's supposed to be this like big special event. And I've heard from a lot of people who say, similarly to finding time for yourself, there's so much pressure to like do something like really good, a good date night, because the time is so hard to come by. But I think just doing whatever it is that is, sometimes it's just the kids are in bed, let's watch a show, let's order dinner, whatever the case may be. But having conversations about things outside of parenting, and just remembering, connecting on an individual level is so important. So sometimes that really means like making almost like a rule, let's not talk about the kids right now, because otherwise it's just really easy to, get resentful and, just be exhausted all the time by the chaos of parenting.
Okay, thank you so much. And I'm
Yeah.
going to introduce Lindsay Powers. She is a longtime journalist whose work has appeared in the Washington Post, the New York Times, the New York Post, Us Weekly, the Hollywood Reporter, Cosmopolitan, CBS This Morning, Good Morning America, Today, CNN, and many other nationwide outlets. She was the founding editor-in-chief of Yahoo Parenting, the vice president for lifestyle and entertainment at SiriusXM, and currently runs her own digital consulting company. Lindsay is a mother of 2 young sons and the co-creator of the viral #NoShameParenting movement, which reached 170 million people and counting on social media. Thank you so much for joining us this evening, Lindsay.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to be a part of this conversation. And as an obsessive book reader and buyer, so grateful to Katie Budget Books for hosting this. So thank you. And I should mention this No Shame Parenting movement, the co-creating is Rachel, the author of The Kids Are in Bed, and the rest of our team at Yahoo Parenting in this small world that we live in, even though we live in different cities. So my book is You Can't F Up Your Kids. And I look at it as the anti-advice parenting book in a sense, because I think that we are conditioned as parents, like at the moment that little line turns pink, we're like, oh, we need to read What to Expect When You're Expecting. Not knocking that book, awesome book, but like we need to say, like, what kind of a parent are we? Are we a natural parent? Are we a attachment parent? Like there's all these parenting buzzwords. And then, and we're so influenced about like what we should be doing, right? Like it may be a generation ago, we would ask our mom and our sister and our neighbor. Now we log onto Facebook and we're like, whoa, like what's, Kylie Jenner doing as a parent? Like, not that we want to keep up with the Kardashians, right? But there she is. What's our frenemy from junior high? How is she raising her kids? And suddenly it's all of this noise. So we feel like, okay, we have to raise our kids a certain way. And then the kid actually arrives and we find that we've like staked our claim in this parenting method and maybe it doesn't work for our family. Olivia, I loved hearing you talk about it as a family unit instead of just a kid or just a method. And I think as moms, and I think, Rachel and Olivia, you both touched on this idea that we almost have to martyr ourselves, right? In our society, women, the more we sacrifice, the more miserable we are, like the better moms we are, right? We're like these saintly moms. So my goal with You Can't F Up Your Kids was to take every major myth from parenting, from pregnancy to preschool, and try to bust it. Or just to like put the expert on the spot and to explain it in a way that ultimately did not say, you must raise your kids this way, but you can raise your kids a million different ways and they're going to be fine. And I think to some people that's scary, right? Because it is a lot easier to pick up a book and for it to like be a manual on how to raise a kid. But anyone that has a real live human child knows that there is literally no such thing as a manual, a one size fits all on how to raise kids. And if there were such a thing, that person would be like a gazillionaire, right? We would all have so much sleep and all of those things. So I start with, I go through chronological order. The book really like the first half, I would say, is kind of like the pregnancy, or I'd say a lot of it's like pregnancy to preschool. But after I get past kind of walking through, the judgment that starts when you're pregnant and with breastfeeding, which is such a hot topic, then I get into things that I think can apply to kids that are a little bit older as well. So it's not just a book for babies, whether that's discipline, screen time, which of course is such a hot button topic right now as well, because we're all stuck inside. And something that I'm really also proud about this book is that it's not written just for moms, and not that I don't think, like moms need a book, but I'm really proud that it's geared toward what I call the modern family. The idea that families are not like man, wife, 2.5 kids, and a white picket fence and a dog anymore, because this idealized 1950s family really does not exist. Rachel had mentioned we're spending more time with our kids now than we ever were before. But even beyond that, when you look at the makeup of a family, it's like there is no family that's like a quote unquote normal family. So I think it's really freeing to know that you're not alone in this crazy parenting world. And I hate that I have to like that I have to say like, it's okay to have these feelings, but I do think that's a really important thing with parenting, right? To know you're not alone and to validate our feelings. And another thing that, I really wanted to do with this book was kind of talk a little bit about the history of these topics that feel so controversial and that we feel so judged over in a way that I don't think is boring, but just to talk about, breastfeeding, for example, is something that we are under so much pressure to do. And I'm not anti-breastfeeding. I loved it. I breastfed both my sons for a long time. But at the same time, if I had not done that, they would have been fine. And when you even look at history back from like Moses having a wet nurse and like the population that breastfed, you can see that it kind of swung in and out of popularity. And I want to point out a couple of things about kind of like these trends in parenthood and how they've swung and why basically why experts are out to scare parents so much, why so many of the like coverage of parenting is like, oh, money, first of all, is a huge reason why you're going to see things promoted. I mean, baby products are cash cows. Formula alone is an $11.5 billion business, which I think is massive to note. I think power and hidden agendas is something that's really important to know. So many things that we're shamed about or shame others about have roots in religion, patriarchy, sexism, racism, classism. And I don't, this is not a book that's going to get extremely political. It really does not get political at all. But I do think that it's really unfair that women feel like, oh, we need a self-help book. And then like, we'll like be a perfect parent when there's a lot of like societal issues that are the reason why we feel so shamed. We're in the US, we have many people don't have health insurance. We don't have paid family leave. Childcare costs more than college tuition in all 50 states. There's a lot of pressure on parents. So I think we should know that we're not alone and we should band together to fight this judgment or rather to fight these issues rather than judging each other. But some interesting examples of these notes of kind of like this, how all of these societal things play into is La Leche League, for example. Awesome group. They can be an amazing group for support for breastfeeding. But they were founded by Catholic housewives who are totally against women working outside of the home. Which I think we have a right to know the background of some of these groups before we knock ourselves out, don't get sleep, and beat ourselves up for not being able to follow what they recommend that we do. The Baby Wise Sleep Book, for example, that's touted in all the Facebook mommy groups, actually started as a religious manual called Preparation for Parenting, Bringing God's Order to Your Baby's Day and Restful Sleep to Your Baby's Night. Again, I have nothing against religion. I think it's wonderful and it can be an amazing resource and community for families. But I do think that before you choose a method to sleep train that may not work for your family, you should know that there's, that it may not be rooted in science. Dr. Sears, the father of attachment parenting, which is extremely controversial. It's essentially where some people love it. And again, I don't knock them. I think it's a wonderful way to raise your children if that's how it works for your family. But it essentially subscribes that a mother has a baby like attached to her for the first like 4 years of her life. And so extended breastfeeding, sharing a family bed, not working outside of the home. They're evangelical Christians, Dr. Sears and his wife, who believed in, quote, God's plan for raising children in a family where the husband is the head and the wife is subservient. Formula at one point was preferred by upper classes until the backlash over more women in the workplace was expressed through pro-breastfeeding campaigns. So I think that is something, again, to keep in the back of our minds. And then the last thing I want to point out with these studies that we follow so closely is that some of them can be thin science. We do not experiment on pregnant women and children, rightfully so, right? Like we don't want to experiment on kids. But as a result, there's a lot of correlation versus causation issues. And what that really means is that if 100 kids wear blue shirts and 100 kids wear glasses, that does not mean that wearing a blue shirt causes you to need to wear glasses. But that is a correlational study. It's not a causation study. So when you look at studies of like getting a C-section is more likely to lead to this, you have to look at who is the kind of person who is more likely to get a C-section, or what other underlying health conditions might they have? So all of this is to say that I don't want to introduce like a lot of doubt. So I bring up the science and the research so that you can walk away feeling like, you know what, this works for my family, and I feel good about that decision. Screen time is something that I think we're all kind of freaking out about right now amid the pandemic. And I didn't write this book for the pandemic, but so much of it I think is really relevant still with it. Is our kids are watching more screens. So so when we go to those appointments with our pediatrician, right, we all read the American Academy of Pediatric Screen Time Guidelines. They tell us how many hours and minutes our kids should watch screens. Then we're like, oh God, our kid is watching more, and we freak. So I called the pediatrician who wrote the screen time rules, and I was like, what's up? So for all of these studies. And she was like, honestly, my 8-year-old watches YouTube. It's bananas if your kid doesn't watch screens. And then she walked me through some examples of when it's too much and some ways to kind of mitigate the risk, like check in with your kids every once in a while, like look at the amount of screen time your kids are watching over the course of a week instead of just a day, right? Like one day it's raining, so maybe you watch a couple of episodes of Paw Patrol. Another day it's sunny and maybe you go outside to the backyard and you don't watch screen time. So to really be able to have a very common sense approach to parenting. And I'm promising you as well, if you're feeling stressed out about screen time, there is no way you're going to look back at this moment in 10 years and be like, man, like I really wish my kids watched less Paw Patrol during that global pandemic. So it's really like a huge call for us to be kinder to ourselves and easier on ourselves. And to remember that we as the parents are members of the family as well, right? Like we are not everything. We don't have to do everything for our children. We can love our children, but it's important to honor ourselves as well. And I want to end on a kind of a funny screen time story. Just a quick graph that I'll read from the book because it still makes me laugh, and why not? We could all use a little bit of laughter, but also hopefully it eases any judgment or concern you may feel about your own kids' screen time habits. And now my kids have this in print forever. Lucky them. Okay. If your child is watching a lot of YouTube or Netflix, it helps to check in every once in a while, especially as one video ends and another begins to autoplay. Everett, one of my 7-year-old, at the time was like 3 when this happened, once requested videos of muddy Jeeps. Brad, my husband, found a bunch on YouTube and then, feeling very satisfied with fulfilling our son's random request so well, jumped into the shower. When he emerged from the bathroom 15 minutes later, Everett was watching videos of naked women playing mud volleyball thanks to YouTube's wacky algorithm. Like, these things happen. They're hilarious. They are not going to ruin our kids. And ultimately, I hope when you put down, you can't F up your kids, you feel just a little bit calmer and less pressured and less judged about the way that you're raising your kids.
Thank you, Lindsay. I love that you focus so much on parenting acceptance and that you talk a lot in the book about not just accepting our own choices, but accepting that other people parent how they parent and that that's okay. And that kind of helps us accept, because I know like a lot of parents, I had some plans when I started having kids about how things were going to go. And you get attached to that plan, right? Like this is the way we're doing it. And I stuck to some things longer than I should that led to a lot of unnecessary frustration for my family. But some of the reason for that was that I thought the way that other people were parenting was wrong, right? And so I couldn't do what they were doing, even if it might have made us all happier. So I love that idea that if we just stop shaming other parents, it gives us that freedom, right? To accept when our parenting styles change because our children change and we change. But especially with the no shame parenting, like, I'm going to be honest, I try not to be judgy, right? But like sometimes you just have the thought, right? Like, what do you do if you feel that kind of judgmental attitude coming up?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And it's hard. I mean, that's like a natural human emotion to kind of judge others, right? We're these social animals. I try to step back and have a little compassion and empathy. You know, I'm not condoning being a terrible parent, right? And I think when you see the title of my book, some people are like that. I get a million DMs and stuff that are like, but you can F up your kids. And I like very explicitly in the book list the 5 things that research shows can screw up your kids. And they're on like a page and a half, right? One is smoking while pregnant. Research has shown that can have some negative issues, but some negative impact rather. But the moment you stop, those automatically start to rewind. Neglect is bad. This is not like when you're overwhelmed with your kid and you close the bathroom for 10 minutes and like take a break and take deep breaths. This is like actual legitimate neglect. Abuse in physical or emotional forms is very bad. And if you are questioning whether you are on the fence of that, you must get help, right? You must speak to someone you trust, a therapist, a clergy person, a partner if you have one. Starvation, like you need to feed your kids. It doesn't need to be all organic, perfectly pureed, grown in your backyard, but you do need to feed your kids. Chicken nuggets count. And not vaccinating your kids. You got the science is there. We can save millions and millions of lives by doing something like that. So I spend that page and a half really defining the 5 things that can F up your kids. And then I spend 300 more pages talking about all the different ways that you cannot screw up your children. And so I think with that in mind, anytime we feel that really like judgy response coming on, we should step back and kind of say like, hey, like that works for them, doesn't work for me. Like lucky them, like try to spin it. And I don't want to be like Pollyanna about it. Like we used to be like, you can do it whatever way works for you. But I do think that it's really freeing to be like, hey, I'm different than them, or like that's for them, not for me. And I tell myself that, and it's been hugely freeing to have that mentality.
And then I want to ask you one oddly specific question. You have a brief thing in there about the tantrum game, and it sounds interesting, but I'm not sure I understand it.
Okay, so the tantrum game is it's developed by Dr. Alan Kasdan, who is the former founder of the Yale Parenting Center, and he's this like super smart guy. And so the ultimate goal of this tantrum game is to kind of de-escalate it and make it not as emotional for the child and for the parent. Because when a kid is having a tantrum, it's a lot of like, they're stressed, you're stressed, they're stressed, you're stressed, and you find yourself, you find it getting bigger and bigger. So in my discipline chapter, I talk a lot about, first about how the idea of discipline is not like timeouts and this and that, but it's more of like coming up with like a family philosophy and trying to raise your kids like toward that family philosophy, right? Like honest or kindness, which sounds really interesting to what's in Olivia's book. So like there's a lot of crossover. So I'm curious to read yours too. So the tantrum game, and of course tantrums are totally normal. It's like a very normal developmental stage. There's a couple of steps. When your kid is not riled up and freaked out. So when you're just like at home, you're going to tell your kid, hey, we're going to have a practice tantrum. I'm going to tell you that you can't watch TV anymore and you're going to go nuts. Like you're going to get mad. And so like you make it a game. And so then you say, all right, it's practice. And the kid, so you say no TV and the kid's like, ah! So you like kind of encourage them, right? Like go like get it out, right? And then you are kind of like laughing and joking. And then, so then what you do is you want to be like, oh, like you did it, like, oh, that was so awesome, like you got mad and you didn't hit me, which sounds like really crazy, but and so you're kind of encouraging them to like get it all out. Then you want to do something physical to kind of like give them like almost like a boundary that it's over. So I will like squeeze, when we played, I would like squeeze my son's shoulders, or you could like pat him on the head, and then you want to take a break and then do it again, right? Like wait a couple of minutes and then play it one more time. And the reason why you do this is because it does like make it kind of funny and jokey, but then it like makes parameters for the next time. So then when they're out like in real life throwing a tantrum, your like animal instinct isn't to be like, oh my God, this kid is like freaking out and we're at Target and like I have to get out of here and I'm so embarrassed, people are judging me. It's to kind of laugh, like it's almost like rewire your own brain to say like, oh, this is like, oh, it's the tantrum game. And then your kid, you're kind of like, hey, and then you kind of talk to them in a way that doesn't escalate it. So it's almost to train the parent just as much as the kid. And then by having that physical action, it like reinforces physically that boundary as well. And according to Dr. Kasdan, this can work for kids as young as 18 months. So your little one, I would be curious to hear how it works for him. It actually worked for my kids. And it essentially just like takes the tension and the buildup out of tantrums. And Dr. Kasdan says that it can like make tantrums totally disappear. I never found that it like completely made tantrums disappear, but it made them feel less catastrophic. And I felt a lot less anxiety about them when my kids were tantruming, especially at inopportune moments.
Okay. So I want to take just a little bit for us to all kind of chat together. And I'm going to start with what probably seems like an obvious question for this panel. But what is kind of your go-to when you're feeling particularly stressed out?
I'll go. I think it depends. You know, as I mentioned earlier, when I'm feeling like overwhelmed, I similarly to you, Anna, like to kind of watch a show to kind of like, but for me, I do enjoy it. It's not, not just doing it to, and I don't like to like channel surf. I like to like get in bed under a cozy blanket and watch a show that I really enjoy. That's like very high on my list. You know, sometimes I do like to exercise or like do some yoga. Sometimes that's, you know, I always like hate to say that because I feel like there was a long time in my life where I didn't really believe anyone who said that. I was like, that's the thing you should want to do, not actually. But I feel like I've gotten to a place where I'm okay. And I think that's partly like, because I'm okay with doing like only 20 minutes, you know, as opposed to feeling like I have to do 45 minutes to an hour to make it valuable. But yeah, I need, and sometimes I just need to get away. You know, I love my kids and I love my family, but for me, like quiet time is really helps me kind of like zone out or just kind of de-stress. So yeah, you know, it usually involves a comfortable blanket. So like reading a book under a cozy blanket, taking a nap, or watching a show.
Mine has changed over the course of the pandemic. Before the pandemic, I would say that I was a full-on extrovert and I like needed to see friends or like talk to people or like just be out and about. And even now there's a little bit of that in my life, but like way lower. Like we have an outdoor pandemic pod, but like it's masked, it's at a playground, it's 6 feet apart. And I like that because I like to talk to people. But now like for unwinding for me, it is a lot of like I actually do like a long walk. I know, Rachel, I was laughing when you said you hate walking. Like I have what I call unicorn Mondays. At like I have sometimes like one a month. So I went part-time. I have a day job as well. And I went part-time at work so I could help homeschool my children. And so I am always either working, I have like a main client that is a super intense role, or I'm homeschooling a second grader and a pre-K kid, which is like my head is always just like, but they go to hybrid school. So they're in school in person for now, knock on wood, like either 2 days or 3 days a week. And anyways, I'm not going to like bore you with my logistical childcare crazy town, but I get a unicorn Monday like once a month where I have no work and no kids. And I will get like 25,000 steps on those days because I will just like put my headphones in and walk by myself. Like I don't even stop for lunch sometimes. I like eat a granola bar. I'm like, this is so great.
I'm laughing because I had forgotten, like if you had asked me this question 10 months ago, I would have been like the most de-stress, like the best thing is what getting together with friends. And I just like haven't really had the chance to do that in the same way in the last 9 months. So I like forgot about that even as a possible answer until you mentioned.
I use TikTok for like a moment, I'm like, I'm just gonna watch some funny dog videos. That's a big one for me. Screaming is a big one for me, and not from an out of control place, because one of the ways to instantly soothe that I work with the vagus nerve, which is like this nerve that you can turn on to turn on the parasympathetic, the slow down, chill out part of our nervous system. And you can access it by getting your uvula, the hanging ball thing, moving by screaming, singing, humming. So I love screaming. And I lie on my partner, which is weird, but it's really soothing for me that I'm like, Jenna, can I just lie on you for a minute? And my kid's like, it's so weird. And I'm like, just look away. There's nothing, we're not doing anything sexual. I'm like, I just need to touch your skin. So I have really boring practical things that I do.
But screaming is a super boring one. But is that why singing helps calm down?
That's yeah. I mean, you could analyze that a few different ways, but anything that gets that uvula, the vocal cords moving, will help activate that vagus nerve. Which is it's a really simple thing too.
Okay, and then we had an attendee ask if you have any tips for connecting with other parents during this very isolating time when normal play dates, etc., are off the table due to COVID.
I have a chart. This is a pandemic, a COVID chart of I am level 1 of protection. I am level 2. I am level 3. It very specifically breaks down into I wear masks every time I leave the house and only socialize with my family. I do X, Y, and Z, because I find that to be the most challenging part, is that I'm constantly no, I will not go out and eat on a patio with you, but I will meet you at a park and we will wear our masks and we will do this. So I find the chart really takes away that level and adds a level of security when I'm talking to people. I'm happy to send it. And if you would like this ridiculous chart, but it takes away a lot of anxiety for me. I also have a standing play date in our local park. It's outside. I think it's helpful for my children to have the same mix of kids every day, and also for me to have other adult humans to talk to every day.
It's funny to say this now after the conversation we've had, but I go on a lot of walks with other people. I don't like walking alone because I get bored, but and I live in Chicago, so things are about to turn for the worse weather-wise. So I don't, I'm definitely getting a little nervous about that. But for me, going for a long walk with someone, outside, so we feel safer, has been a lifesaver, just in terms of connecting with people. And, I think obviously we're all probably having a good amount of Zoom fatigue right now, but I think, in lieu of real life, live in-person connection, seeing someone else's face does make a difference. So, you get on the phone. Getting on the phone, my first book was about friendship. And, one thing that always stuck with me was this idea that, in person is better than Skype, but Skype is better than the phone, and the phone is better than just, Facebook. So any level of connection, I think we're all kind of terrified of talking on the phone these days, or it just sounds like such a chore, but actually when you actually pick up the phone and do it and you hang up, for me, having a conversation with an old friend is so revitalizing. So I think, remember that there are all these, we are lucky, technology can run amok, but we are lucky that we have a lot of ways to connect with people, even when we can't see them live. So, I sometimes say to my kids, I'm going downstairs, pretend I'm not home. And or say to my partner, my husband, I'm not home, so you're in charge, and I'm going to go downstairs and be on the phone or have a Zoom with my friends or book club or whatever the case may be. My book club has shifted to Zoom, but it still, we had it last night, and I still was a new person at the end.
I almost never want to connect with other parents. I find them really scary, and I find the social interactions really hard. So I don't know. My friends, I can tell you what to do with my friends who also happen to be parents sometimes. We tend to do activities online together. And so there was one friend who had this trivia night that was also like raising money for awareness around self-harm, and like that was really fun and really competitive. And so we would do it online together, but also be on the phone so we could be chatting. Or there's really cool events in Toronto that like things get delivered to your house and you do them online. So there's this once a month like beer and cheese pairing, which is so fun. And they bring on like the owner of the brewery, and like there's a cheese master, I don't know what, the cheese sommelier, and we all talk together and we'll do that. And so we just have tried really hard to be like, what activities would we normally do? And how can we do that online instead? And that's okay. But I just like socially anxious folks, I hear you, man. If you don't want to hang out with other parents, you don't have to. You do not have to. That shit is stressful.
What's been so weird for me during all of this is that I have always thought of myself as an introvert, and I didn't realize how much of that was kind of enabled by the fact that I work in retail. Until we were in a very brief full shutdown here in Houston, but there were 3.5 weeks where we were fully shut down. And after about day 3, I thought I was going to lose it, right? And I couldn't figure out what the problem was, because after work, I go home, I hang out with my family. Like a lot of my life is just at home, and I'm fine with that. And it turns out that like there's this little bit of extrovert in me that was getting fulfilled by working with the public and wasn't anymore, which strangely actually led to me having a lot more phone calls with friends than I would normally have, because I would get this midnight madness. I was having the pandemic insomnia, which I think was an issue for a lot of people. And so like not actually midnight, but after my kids had gone to bed and later than I would normally even think about calling people. Luckily, I have some other friends that were also not sleeping. I mean, that's not really lucky for anyone, I guess, but at the time it felt lucky. It was serendipitous. So that's what I did. I'm certainly not a parenting expert either, but and I have a friend, luckily, who lives in my neighborhood that we meet in our driveways and have mommy time every once in a while, because we can both still be close to home. And so that's what we've been doing for that. So yeah, I love that so much of what it felt like all of your books were talking about was kind of taking away the judgment and finding what individually works for you and your family. And I do think that that's so important for relieving stress and parenting, that there's all these books on how to parent right. And it does feel like sometimes that just adds to the stress. I am all for being informed and knowing my options, because that is helpful with stress also. But there comes a point where it's like, okay, but this doesn't feel right for me. And so now am I wrong for not wanting to do that? So I loved that the message in all of your books was very individual, that it does feel like society, and especially with social media everywhere, which can be useful for things. I'm also in some parent support groups online through social media, which are very helpful, especially right now. So I don't want to minimize that, but seeing everybody all the time in the perfect life and all the highlight moments, right, where everything looks perfect. That social media has caused a lot of stress because we all feel like we're supposed to be perfect all the time. And like some of those photos where they get the kids, right, and the scenes where everything's perfect, and I'm like, how do you even get your child to sit still, much less like set all that up? So I guess the last kind of thing I want to talk about a little bit is, how do you guys individually deal with that? I know one of you at least addressed in your book that you have a limit for your social media time set on your phone. And does that help, just staying off of social media a little bit more, help you not feel all that pressure of societal expectations?
Well, that was me. And I will be honest that I have disabled those limits. I was very excited to find out that there was this option, and on your phone, or at least on an iPhone, that you can set a limit and then it'll kind of give you a nudge. I forget why I disabled it, but that says like, okay, you've kind of gone over the time allotted. Do you want to ignore this message? Like, it wasn't like you couldn't get on. And I forget, probably because we were in a pandemic and I was, I certainly, I joke that sometimes I'll be like, oh my God, I have no time. And my husband will be like, someone should write a book about that. Maybe, if I'm like, oh, I don't know. I know I want to go do this for myself, but I feel kind of guilty. And he's like, what? So we all need the reminders. And so I think of myself, I'm certainly not perfect in any of the ways that I suggest, but I think just knowing, that's, I think I've gotten to a place where I know that there's no way you can get your kid to sit happily for those beautiful pictures for that long. And so I can look at that and be like, that's cute. Like that looks like, for me, like that looks like an unpleasant experience because so much pressure into like everyone looking great and being well behaved and getting the perfect photo. So I think it's helped just sort of, the more we kind of have these conversations that we're having and are honest about what does parenting and what does life really look like for a family, makes it, I think, a lot easier to look at those and say like, oh, that's great. I'm glad they like got that photo for themselves. But like, yeah, I'm sure, I know how many outtakes there were as well. So I think, I do try, I think I am on social media a little less than I was once, but my phone is no longer like yelling at me to get off.
I have a complex relationship, I think, with social media because I actually find it really stressful. I don't, except for TikTok, which I find very soothing, but I find I'm late to the game a lot. Like I'm newer to Instagram. I don't really use other forms of social media because it doesn't leave me feeling that great. It just makes me feel like I don't know the rules of how to engage online very well. But when it comes to like other people's parenting stuff, I think as like everybody else is sort of talking about tonight, I do feel really happy for folks when they're doing things that feel really happy for them. I'm like, oh, I don't want to go apple picking, but it's really cool that you do. Or I don't want to do that, but like I can see that that's fun. And I just try to tap into a lot of generosity. And also sometimes if I see something, I'm like, that does look fun, then I'm like, oh, I could do that. And so I try to just keep that lens around everybody does what works for them, which is really freeing. I'm like, you have permission to do that. And I have permission to not do that, or vice versa.
I love that. I really like TikTok too. It's super fun. I watch it with my kids sometime. You gotta, which can be all over the place, but it is really fun. So I also agree that I have kind of a complex relationship with social media. I have found that I just try to be flexible with it. When I launched my Instagram, No Shame Parenting, I made this really conscious effort to show the less than ideal moments of parenting and then to be really open about why, like, here's my kid having a tantrum, or here's, my kid all dirty at the park or whatever. Just it is kind of like the anti-Instagram, I felt like, and I had a lot of fun with it. Lately, I've been just like very burned out on social media. I think the author of How to Be an Anti-Racist kind of said it really well, that it's like when you're on social media, you're just like this hustle, and you don't feel like you've accomplished anything. And it just is like this exhausting experience at the end. It's kind of like when you're hustling at work or whatever, and like you need to take a break. So that really resonated with me. And I have kind of been like stepping back a little bit. I also don't go on Facebook as much anymore because I found that was giving me this like incredibly emotional response, especially in the middle of the election and everything. And like, I'm very happy to engage with people that I speak to face to face or that are in my family, but I suddenly found myself like engaging with like distant aunts that live like different states away that I hadn't seen in 30 years and getting very riled up. And I was like, okay. So I put my social media apps into a folder on like a different page on my phone. So I have to like scroll to get there, which is what like sociologists or researchers will call adding friction, so that like it takes one more step. And I find that like now I just don't really go on Facebook anymore. But then I feel like the ultimate, like the opposite thing is like, then I don't see the pictures of my friends' babies as much. And I feel like, oh, like then I'm a shitty friend because I didn't like that cute picture of their kid in the Halloween costume. So I find myself like telling my friends, right? Like, oh, just so you know, like I'm not on Facebook as much anymore, which is like also weird. So I, as I try to not judge others in this situation, again, I try to just like not judge myself and just be like, it's weird times. It is what it is. do what you need to like emotionally feel good.
Feels like we're all sort of touching on this idea of like how you actually feel when you're on social media. Like sometimes I'm on it and I'm like, the way you feel about TikTok, I'm not on TikTok, but the way you guys feel about TikTok, I'll be like watching someone's stories. I'm like, oh, this is like fun. I feel like I'm like seeing people's lives. And other times I can kind of tell like, this feels icky. I want to read a book instead. Like, I don't like the way this is making me feel. So I think the more we can sort of like internally understand how we are actually feeling when we're looking at it, because I think it can change from moment to moment. I don't know, has been helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you, ladies, so much. I do just want to tell a brief story. So tonight I worked a shift today at work and then went home to do dinner and stuff with the kids before coming back up here to do the Zoom event. And I had the best of intentions, right, to make some like healthy fried catfish. I am not a fryer of foods generally, just because like it's messy and I cannot figure out how to not burn myself. So apparently I used the wrong oil. So we ended up having pre-made frozen taquitos for dinner. And thanks to all of your books in part, because you all sort of deal with the food issue at some point, that it was like, okay, well, this is what we're doing. We're having taquitos for dinner and that's okay, right? So I am so grateful. I'm so grateful to be doing that. I'm so grateful this is part of my job. And I'm so grateful that you guys are putting books out in the world about parents being able to accept their families and themselves as they are. And just as long as everyone in the family is okay, we're okay, right? Like, so thank you all so much for your books and for being here with us this evening.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.
And
I'm so excited to read your books. I like cannot wait to read them.
Thank you. Good luck with your launch.
And thank you, attendees, for coming. We are grateful to have you also. Obviously, we have the kids this side. The kids are in bed and you can't F up your kids in store now. And Olivia's book, Impossible Parenting, will be here on the 24th. So you can go ahead and order any of them now through the website. We can hold them until Olivia's comes out, or you can pick up the ones that are available now, or you can come in store. We are doing walk-in shopping and just limiting. So thank you all so much for coming. Thank you again, panelists, and everybody have a good night.
Thanks.
Thank you.